I read your book, and I had a deep rooter on. I have a chicken tractor with a 40 square foot boom on it. 3 days ago, I took a round compost bin. It was about 3 feet down, about 3 feet of compost. It had litter from the garden last year and just stuff I'd thrown in there. Just good mix of country compost. I dumped that thing whole, and it stuck together because it had been disturbed. There was a column about 3 feet in diameter. It fell over a little bit, about 3 feet high. 2 days later, I couldn't tell that compost pile from the deep river that had been working for weeks.
So Jerry is talking about an experience on his place in which the chickens were doing something we're going to talk about later, and that is they're working with this. We're interested in manure management, but actually they're in the end making high quality compost for us. I'm going to have to move on with it, folks. We will have a question period later. For watering, I like to automate watering as much as I can, and so I use supply hoses out onto the pasture that terminate in a float-operated valve, sort of like is in your toilet tank. Automatically fills and then shuts off. And I find open waterers are not a good idea on bare ground. The water gets really dirty in that case. But if the water is moved around so that it's always over fresh grass, you can use an open water like this, automatically filled, and it will stay clean. Next slide, please. And if you have water valve, their equivalent of dust bathing is water bathing. And besides, they just love it. And you will love watching them. So you can use the same kind of setup, but a bigger tank for ducks or geese. Next slide, please. Guess who else out there likes a chicken dinner as much as you do? So Mr. Bretta Fox or Mr. Raccoon or the hawk in your neighborhood. These are the bad guys, right? Negative. We need to develop a deep sense of appreciation for the ecological services rendered to us by these guys. At the same time, we have to remember that they do indeed like a chicken dinner as much as we do. So, as I put it in the book, what it comes down to is the best offense is a good defense. And if we take to heart our responsibility to protect our birds, even as we respect the role of predators in the ecology, then we will find the ways that we can protect our flock while living, coexisting peacefully with these friends. You will have losses, and don't feel bad about it as long as you learn from the loss and make adjustments. The people that drive me crazy are the ones that lose chickens to this guy and don't make any change. You know Einstein's definition of insanity. Doing the same thing and expecting different results. So if you have losses, figure out why, figure out who, make change. That's it. More and more people are using guardian animals, especially dogs, even with quite small flocks. If you've got a flock of half a dozen chickens, you may not want to, invest the time and effort into training a dog to work with them. But I do know quite a few people with pretty small flocks, a couple of dozen chickens, and it's worth it to them to get a well-trained livestock dog to help defend the flock. And another option is electric net fencing. It's lightweight, it's easy to set up and take down to move, and you can put your birds out in pasture safe from anything on the ground with a nervous system with electric net fencing. Next slide. So here's another electric net protecting the chickens that are being moved around, and remember the possibility for going mobile and building a mobile pasture shelter so that you can move the birds around to new pasture. That's critical to breaking disease cycles. Always have them on fresh grass rather than on the same ground where pathogens or parasites can proliferate. So, in many cases, many management situations, a mobile shelter can be a real key to management. And, you know, that too will depend on how you put that together, will depend on what's in the recycle pile begging to be used, and maybe on how whimsical your field. Next slide. Some people who have market egg operations use what's called an egg mobile, pulled around behind a tractor or a pickup or an ATV to keep the chickens out on the pasture, maybe follow the beef cattle as in General Sound's model. And so this may be a larger scale operation, but you might consider something like this as the permanent housing for your birds and just move them less frequently. But a structure like this could be their winter housing as well as summer housing, and an occasional move with the pickup might work for you. Next slide. And here is a really ingenious idea, a separate little shelter for about 4 to 6 hens, mounted on a landscaper's wagon. And this is a separate little pasture pen. It has wire on the top too to protect from aerial predators. And you don't see them, but there are a couple of little wheels on the frame of the separate pasture pen. So at night, she shuts the chickens up inside the house to protect them from predators, moves the pasture pen first, and then moves the shelter, and it docks into a very narrow opening. She lets the ramp down from the chicken house using this remote control strap that goes through the chicken house. It's really an ingenious system for a very small flock of birds. Next slide. Now, we talked about electric net fencing before. Before we talked about electronet fencing, but we were thinking more about the outside of the fence. That is, the fence is protecting from the predators on the outside, but there's an inside to that fence too, isn't there? And the inside of the fence suggests that we can use an electric net fence to confine the birds where we want them to be on pasture, of course, but also we might choose to keep them on the inside and confine to a certain area to do useful work for them. For example, next slide. Here is an area that's under a beautiful cover crop of cowpeas and small grains. And next slide. How much later do you suppose that is? 2 weeks to the day. And they have totally tilled in this cover crop. They have totally tilled in the cover crop. And what else have they been doing? Eating a lot of green plant matter, and a lot of earthworms, and a lot of grubs.
How many chickens are those?
How many chickens? I think about 18 in that group, something like that.
And how big was that space that you said they do it to?
How big was that space? It's surrounded by a 165-foot electronet. I think it's about 1,700 feet, 1,700 square feet. Next slide, please. Now, so that bit of work, while the chickens are getting some free natural foods and doing real gardening work for us, that was achieved using electric net fencing. But here's another idea for achieving the same thing with a smaller flock in a smaller space. That is a chicken tractor. And Pat has a book on sale called Chicken Tractor. It's based on this idea of using chickens in the garden by keeping them confined inside a shelter that's sized to fit our wide bed, one of our wide garden beds, and however long you want to make it, and just a small number of chickens. But behind there is totally tilled in. This is almost totally tilled in, and I'm ready to move them on to the next part of this cover crop that I wanted to till in. And what else about that cover crop? Seeds. This is oats, it could be wheat or barley. And so while they're tilling in the cover crop, they're getting that extra bonus of free natural feeds. Next line, please. And folks, there's probably nothing you can do as a gardener that will benefit your soil more than lots and lots and lots of cover cropping. Every chance you get, do some cover cropping. When do you suppose this is in my garden? It's at the end of the garden season, when most gardens, many gardens, too many gardens, are abandoned, they're bare to the harsh abuse of winter. We can do better than that by planting at the end of the season. As soon as the last crop comes off, the same day, plant a cover crop and protect the soil over the winter. And guess what? With these cold hardy cover crops like the crucifers, small grains, and peas, they're very cold hardy. They may not survive the whole winter, but they will go deep into the winter. We can cut them. If we've got a nice cover crop like this that we're using to feed the soil, we can also cut them and feed some greenery to the fresh greenery to the birds on a daily basis. And you've got some of these greens to put on your own table. So that's really pulling everything together into one project, meeting so many different needs in one project. So remember that picture. End of the season. Ready for winter, feeding the, protecting the soil, feeding the chickens, feeding me. Next slide, please. How many of you are gardeners? How many of you gardeners make compost? How many of you gardeners who make compost have a dedicated place where you always make your compost? You're almost there. You're almost there with this terrific idea for once again finding ways to get the chickens to do work that my lazy old butt doesn't have to do. So in this case, if we just put a light enclosure, light wooden framing with chicken wire, to enclose that dedicated compost making space, then we can put the chickens in there and let them work the compost for us. We don't have to get out there doing this thing. We just put all of the spent, the weeds, the spent crop, plants, grass clipping, autumn leaves, whatever, put it in there and let the chickens turn it into, next slide please, I think, well yeah, this shows them working inside the enclosure, some fast growing bean vines to provide shade, keep them cool, and they're doing what they love to do. When I talk about putting chickens to work, I'm not talking about a cruel exploitation. I'm talking about doing them a favor, giving them what they most want to do, and they get these wonderful feeding benefits out of it. The compost heap generates a lot of biological activity, and they're snacking on all kinds of organisms in that heap. Next slide, please. And this is the result. In my book, I have a couple of endnotes where I calculate the tons, that's tons plural, of compost, chicken-powered compost, generated on my place in a given season. So here's an example.
Is that rototill, is you later after the chickens go on, is that rototill?
Is that rototill? Sir, I did own a little Mattis tiller years and years ago, and thank heaven I finally had the good sense to give it away. I'm very big. I mean, if you're a gardener, you make your own choices. And